Alara had learned, long before she turned 18, that hope was something other people got to have. In the small, wind-bitten settlement on the edge of the prairie, she moved like a shadow, quiet, careful, stepping softly as if the entire world were made of thin glass that would shatter if she breathed too loudly. Her days were predictable, not because they were peaceful, but because the cruelty that defined them never changed. Her family, if one could still call them, that treated her less like blood and more like a burden. Her mother had died when she was young, and the loss had pushed her father into a hardened, bitter existence. Resentment carved deep lines into his face, and each year those lines grew sharper. Her older brothers followed his example, picking up the habits and violence they learned at home. By the time she was old enough to cook a pot of stew or haul water from the well, she had already become the household scapegoat. Her father claimed she was useful, but only because she absorbed all the anger they had nowhere else to put. She learned early to take a hit without crying, to hold herself in a way that didn't provoke them, to keep her voice low and her footsteps even lower. If she cried, they yelled. If she yelled, they struck. If she stayed silent, they accused her of sulking. The rules changed daily, and yet the punishment remained the same. The neighbors rarely interfered. Some heard the yelling, some caught glimpses of her bruises, but turning a blind eye was easier than stepping into someone else's storm. Others simply believed her father's stories that she was wild, disobedient, troublesome, small. Towns had a way of deciding a person's reputation. Long before learning their truth, every morning she woke before dawn, long before the rest of the household, slipping out of the narrow, drafty room they allowed her. She would chop wood, gather eggs, sweep the porch, scrub the floors, and prepare breakfast so her father could start his day in silence. If he had coffee in his hand and a plate of food on the table before he had time to complain, the morning blows might be limited. It wasn't a guarantee, but sometimes it worked. Sometimes winter was the worst. The cold seeped through the wooden boards, and her hands often shook from frostbite as she worked. Still, she kept going, because stopping wasn't an option. Her father's temper flared if chores weren't done properly, and the beatings worsened if he thought she was trying to get out of work. When the nights turned cold, she curled under a thin blanket, bruises blooming across her back, ribs, and shoulders, reminding her of her place. But Alara wasn't weak. Broken, perhaps, but not weak. Deep inside her, a tiny flame lived, flickering but stubborn. She didn't know why it hadn't gone out, but she held on to it fiercely. Maybe it was the memory of her mother, who used to whisper that Alara's heart was strong enough to outshine any darkness. Maybe it was a quiet, instinctive belief that life wasn't meant to be like this, that somewhere, somehow, peace existed. Sometimes she wandered to the edge of the fields after finishing her chores, looking out at the endless prairie stretching toward the horizon. She wondered what lay beyond it. Towns, families, people who didn't raise their hands at the smallest inconvenience. She liked to imagine a life where morning didn't bring fear and where footsteps approaching her door didn't make her flinch, but dreams were dangerous in her house. Her father hated the look of longing in her eyes, calling it ungratefulness. He wanted obedience, silence, and smallness. Anything else was a threat. By late spring, the situation grew worse. Her brothers, both grown, began talking of marrying her off, not out of concern for her future, but because they believed she could be traded for money or land. They argued over who would get the profit. Alara overheard them one night while she was scrubbing spilled stew from the floor. The casual tone of their voices chilled her far worse than any winter wind. She realized then that her life wasn't just miserable, it was in danger of being handed from one abuser to another. One evening, after a blow to her cheek left her seeing white spots, she slipped outside to catch her breath. The sun was setting, turning the sky a soft, forgiving gold. She pressed her palm to her cheek, feeling the swelling, the sting, the familiar ache. She exhaled shakil. Why? She told herself the same thing she had repeated for years. Just survive tonight. She didn't know that in less than a week, her life would collide with someone who would shatter that cycle. Someone who saw her not the bruises, not her silence, not her obedience, but her. Someone who would make a choice no one else ever had, to help her, to take her away, to give her a chance at something she had almost stopped believing in. Widowed farmer named Rowan Halley. But for now, she stood alone at the edge of the porch, not yet knowing that her life was about to turn, not gently, but in a way that would rewrite everything. She only knew the wind against her face, the burning pain in her cheek, and the soft whisper of her mother's voice in the back of her memory telling her, "This is not where your story ends." Rowan Halley had learned the shape of grief long before he ever saw the bruised girl standing on that porch. His life had once been full of laughter, full of plans, full of a woman he had loved with a quiet, wholehearted devotion. His wife, Mara, had been the anchor of the farmhouse and the steady warmth in every cold season. When she died 3 years earlier during a harsh winter sickness, Rowan's world shrank. The silence in the house felt unnatural at first. Then slowly, painfully, he grew used to it. He filled his days with farm work, and when the nights became too long, he worked some more, fixing fences that didn't need fixing, mending tools that weren't broken. Anything to outrun the echo of Mara's absence. People in town respected him. Some said he was quiet, some said he was lonely, others called him steadfast. He didn't mind any of those labels. They felt easier to carry than grief. But Rowan had a way of seeing people really seeing them. It was a skill he never chose, but one he had earned. Loss sharpened his awareness of suffering in others. He noticed things: a tremor in someone's hands, the tightness behind a forced smile, the stiffness of a person trying not to wince. So when he first saw Elara, he sensed something was wrong before he even understood what had happened one late afternoon when he traveled into town for tea and spare nails. He wasn't someone who lingered in public places, but he always made time to greet people politely. That day, he entered the general store just as Elara was leaving it. She stepped aside quickly, head lowered, shoulders curled inward. As if apologizing for taking up space, Rowan offered a quiet "pardon me," expecting her to look up at least briefly. She didn't. Instead, she flinched not from surprise, but from instinct. A subtle, practiced recoil. His brow crested as she hurried past him. Her sleeve slipped up just enough for him to see the edge of a bruise ringing her wrist. Not old, not fading fresh. He stood there for a long moment, watching her retreat down the street, her father barking at her to keep up. The man's hand closed too tightly around her arm. Rowan saw her wince. Others saw it too, he was sure, but nobody said anything. That night, as Rowan sat alone at his dinner table, he found himself thinking of the bruised wrist, the flinch, the downcast eyes. There had been fear in her posture, the same kind of fear he had once seen in injured animals trying not to provoke further harm. He didn't know her name, but he felt a sinking certainty growing in his chest. The next day, he passed near her family's property while delivering a repaired wagon wheel to a neighboring ranch. Smoke curled from the chimney, chickens clucked in the yard, and from the barn he heard someone yelling. The words were sharp, vicious. A girl's voice answered small, apologetic, and then came the unmistakable crack of a slap. Rowan halted his horse. His grip tightened on the reins so hard the leather creaked. He should keep going. It wasn't his place. People minded their own business out here. But every instinct in him screamed that turning away was wrong. His late wife had always told him, kindness isn't something you choose when it's convenient. It's something you do when it's needed. He rode on only because the situation wasn't yet clear enough for him to intervene. Still, the sound of that slap followed him all the way home. Days passed. Rowan found reasons, some real, some invented, to travel along the road near her family's homestead. And each time he caught glimpses of her, hanging laundry with trembling hands, hauling buckets of water far too heavy for her thin frame, always moving with the wary caution of someone expecting pain. Once, he spotted her rubbing her ribs tenderly when she thought no one was watching. Another time, her father yanked her roughly by the hair because she had dropped a basket of potatoes. Rowan felt something heavy settle inside him. Not anger, anger was too small a word. It was a deep, simmering sense of injustice that burned cold, not hot. He remembered the night he buried his wife. The pastor had spoken about the value of a soul, the sacredness of a life. Rowan believed those words more now than ever. And seeing Ilara treated with such cruelty twisted something inside him. One late evening, while delivering a sack of grain to a neighbor, he overheard a conversation between her brothers. They were laughing about getting something useful out of her soon, about finding a buyer. The casual tone made Rowan's stomach turn. Human beings were not livestock. A young woman was not a piece of property to barter away. He went home, but sleep refused to come. He stared at the flickering lamplight, Mara's old shawl draped over the rocking chair. He could almost hear her voice again, urging him to act. She had always hated injustice, always stepped between the vulnerable and those who preyed on them. "What would you do, Mara?" He whispered into the stillness. He already knew the answer. The next morning, Rowan hitched his wagon and set off with a strange certainty in his chest, as though fate had placed him on a road with only one direction. When he reached the edge of the town, he saw her Ilara standing outside the store again, carrying heavy sacks alone while her father talked loudly with another man. She staggered beneath the weight, her face pale, her lips chapped, the skin around her left eye faintly bruised. No one stepped in to help. Rowan did. He approached calmly, gently touching the sack she struggled with. "Let me help," he said softly. She froze, looked up, and for the first time, their eyes met. What he saw in them shifted something inside him entirely. Fear, exhaustion, resignation. And beneath all that buried, flickering hope. A hope so small it hardly dared to exist. It was in that moment Rowan Hawley made a decision he didn't yet have words for. A decision that would soon change both their lives. He would not turn away from this girl. He would not ignore what he's seen. He would not leave her to suffer alone. Whatever happened next, he would stand between her and the world that had hurt her so deeply. He just didn't know yet how soon he would be forced to act. The breaking point came on a night so quiet that even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Ilara had spent the entire day working in the fields, mending fences, hauling water, cleaning, cooking. Her tasks never ended, and her exhaustion felt bone deep. The sun had burned her neck, her hands were raw, and her back ached with every small movement. But she didn't complain. Complaints earned punishment. Silence most days kept things from getting worse. That evening, though, silence wasn't enough. Her father returned home drunk. It wasn't unusual for him to drink, but it was rare for him to drink so heavily that his steps wobbled and his words slurred beyond understanding. Ilara's brothers were home too, already agitated from a day of failed hunting. They had tempers that ignited like dry tinder, quick, uncontrollable, and dangerous. Ilara kept her eyes down and focused on preparing dinner. She moved around the kitchen like she was made of glass, careful not to clatter a pot or drop a spoon. But the house felt wrong tonight, thick with something poisonous, like anger waiting for a spark. The spark came when her father tried to sit and knocked over his cup of stew. Hot broth splashed across the table and onto his clothes. He roared her name. Ilara froze. Her breath caught painfully in her chest. I'll clean it," she whispered, already stepping forward with a cloth. But he was too far gone to hear anything but his own rage. Her brothers joined in, their words sharp, blaming her for being slow, useless, clumsy, even though she hadn't touched the cup. She backed away, heart pounding, shoulders hunched defensively. She knew what was coming. She always did. Her father lunged first, grabbing her by the wrist. Pain shot up her arm. He shook her so hard her teeth rattled, yelling about disrespect, about laziness, about how she owed him everything since he fed and clothed her. Fed, clothed, barely, and at a cost no one should have to pay. When she didn't respond because responding only made things worse, he struck her across the face. She fell to the floor, vision blurring, ears ringing. Before she could scramble to her feet, one of her brothers kicked her in the ribs. The other grabbed her hair and yanked her upright, forcing her to stare into her father's furious eyes. "You listen to me," he slurred, pointing a trembling finger so close she could smell alcohol on his breath. "We're selling you. End of the week. Someone'll finally pay good money for you, and you'll be gone." Her heart stopped. Sold. They had talked about it before. She had hoped foolishly that it was an empty threat, but now she saw how real their intentions were. Her father's greed had hardened into a plan. Panic clawed at her chest. Sold. Given away to a stranger. Traded like livestock. She didn't know who the buyer was, but she knew her life would not improve. The world her father lived in was full of men who treated women like property. If her own family treated her this way, what would a stranger do? Her breath came shallow and fast. "Please, please don't," she choked out, her voice thin and trembling. Her father hit her again, a blow so hard she tasted blood. "No one wants a girl who talks back," he snarled. Her brothers laughed. That was when something inside Alara broke. Not her spirit, but the illusion that survival meant staying quiet. For the first time in years, she felt a surge of something fierce, something desperate. She tried to pull away. Her father tightened his grip. Her brothers closed in, and she understood, with terrifying clarity, that if she didn't leave tonight, right now she might never get another chance. If they sold her, she would disappear and no one would know. No one would ask. No one would care. Except one person might notice. Rowan Hawley. The gentle widowed farmer who had helped her carry a sack without asking for anything in return. The man whose eyes softened when he looked at her, not with pity, but with concern. The only person who had seen her bruises and frowned instead of looking away. She didn't know him, but she trusted him instinctively. Not for safety, she didn't dare hope for that, but for decency. The bare minimum her family never gave. Her father shoved her to the ground again, shouting for her to get up and finish cleaning. But she didn't move. She lay still, waiting, listening, thinking. Her brothers turned away first. Then her father stomped off, muttering curses under his breath. They were too drunk, too distracted, too confident in her obedience to notice the quiet shift in her breathing, the shift from fear to decision. Alara waited until the house grew silent, until snores replaced yelling. She pushed herself to her feet, biting back a cry as her ribs screamed in pain. She cleaned the blood from her mouth with the back of her hand. She went to her tiny room. There wasn't much to take. A worn shawl that had belonged to her mother, a cracked comb, and a small bundle of dried herbs she used for bruises. She wrapped them in a cloth and tied it tight. Her hands shook. Her legs felt weak, but she didn't stop. Moving as quietly as a ghost, she crept toward the back door. Every step felt like walking toward a cliff's edge. Not knowing if she would fall or fly, she paused with her hand on the door. If her father woke and found her gone, he would hunt her. Her brothers would too. She knew what they were capable of. She had the scars to prove it. But staying meant losing everything. She opened the door and stepped into the night. The air was cold but clean, the sky vast and scattered with stars. Her breath hitched, a mix of terror and something that felt almost like freedom. She didn't know exactly where Rowan lived, but she had seen him ride past often enough to know the direction. His farmhouse was miles away, but she would walk until her legs gave out if she had to. Every step away from home felt like stepping into unfamiliar territory. Every sound made her flinch. Every shadow felt like a threat, but she kept walking, because running away wasn't just escape, it was survival. And for the first time in her life, she was choosing it. Rowan Hawley had never been a man prone to sudden decisions. He thought things through, measured his words, tended his land and his life with patient, steady hands. But that night, long after Alara had slipped out of her father's house, Rowan lay awake with a heaviness he couldn't ignore. He couldn't shake the look in her eyes from earlier that week. He couldn't shake the way she winced when she lifted something heavy. He couldn't shake the bruises she tried to hide beneath her sleeves. He couldn't shake the way her shoulders hunched like she expected every sound to become a blow. He told himself he was imagining things. That maybe it wasn't his place. That maybe someone else, someone closer, someone braver would do something. But those thoughts rang hollow. He had lived long enough to know when a person was suffering. And he had lived long enough to know that most people didn't intervene. They looked away. Rowan refused to be one of them. Hours slipped by as he sat at his table, staring into the lamplight, wrestling with the ache in his chest. He thought of his late wife Mara and how she had always stepped in when she saw mistreatment. She had been the fire to his earth, bold, compassionate, unafraid to defend anyone who needed it. He could almost hear her voice urging him, "If you can help, Rowan, then you must." Finally, with a long, exhausted breath, he stood. Something inside him had shifted quietly but firmly into resolve. He pulled on his boots, lit a lantern, and stepped outside into the cool darkness. He didn't know exactly why he walked the direction he did. Maybe instinct. Maybe worry. Maybe the memory of the slap he'd heard the week before still echoing in his ears. The path toward Elara's family homestead stretched ahead, silent and shadowed. His steps were slow at first, almost unsure, but the farther he walked, the more certain he became. As he approached the crossroads near her family's land, he saw a thin figure in the distance. At first, he thought he was seeing a ghost, someone too frail, too small, too unsteady to be wandering alone at midnight. But when the lantern light reached her face, recognition struck him like a physical blow. Elara. She was shivering violently, her clothes torn and dusty, her face pale with more than fear. Her lip was split. One eye was swollen. Her arms trembled with exhaustion as she clutched a bundle to her chest. She looked like she might collapse any second. Rowan stopped dead still. Elara? The name left his lips before he even realized he knew it. He had overheard someone say it days before. She flinched at the sound of a man's voice and took a stumbling step back. Fear flared so sharply in her eyes that Rowan felt his heart clench. "It's all right," he said softly, raising his lantern higher and lowering his voice to something slow and gentle. "It's me. Rowan Hawley, you remember? From the store." She watched him, breath ragged, like a cornered animal trying to decide whether he was a predator or a lifeline. I'm sorry," she whispered, voice cracking. "I didn't mean to, I had to leave." She swayed. Rowan stepped forward carefully, leaving space between them. "You're hurt," he said quietly. She didn't deny it. She didn't make excuses. She simply lowered her eyes, and the tears she had been holding back spilled over, streaking down her bruised cheeks. "I can't go back," she whispered. They'll kill me." Rowan's stomach twisted. He had suspected her situation was bad, but not this. Not terror spoken so plainly. Not a girl running barefoot through the night because staying meant destruction. "You don't have to go back," he said firmly. "But I don't have anywhere to go," she said. Voice small, broken. "Yes, you do," Rowan said. "Come with me." The moment those words left his mouth, the night seemed to still. Alara looked stunned. Not relieved, stunned. As though the idea that someone might help her willingly was too large to understand. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you?" She shook her head weakly. "No one helps me." "I know," Rowan said. And he meant it in the deepest way. "But I will." Her lower lip trembled. She looked at him for a long, searching moment, as if trying to find the lie hidden in his face. But she found none. Rowan's eyes were steady, sincere, concerned, but full of something stronger too, conviction. Still, she hesitated. "My father. He'll come after me." Rowan nodded slowly. "Then he'll have to deal with me." He said it so simply, yet the confidence behind the words made Alara's breath hitch. Not because Rowan sounded violent, he didn't. He sounded certain, capable, protective, and no one had ever spoken for her like that before. Finally, with trembling steps, she nodded. "Double quotes, all right," she whispered. Rowan held out his hand, not to grab her, not to pull her, but to offer support. She hesitated one last time, then placed her small, shaking hand into his larger, steady one. Her fingers were ice cold. Her pulse raced wildly. "Easy," Rowan murmured. "You're safe now." She tried not to cry, but her breath broke, and a sob escaped before she could swallow it. Rowan didn't flinch. He didn't shush her. He simply kept her hand in his and guided her gently toward his wagon, parked near the roadside. When she climbed up, she sat rigidly upright, as if expecting to be scolded. Rowan wrapped his coat around her shoulders. She froze, shocked by the unexpected warmth. "You'll be warm soon," he said quietly. Then, with one last glance toward the dark road she had come from, the road of bruises, fear, and pain, Rowan climbed onto the bench beside her and flicked the reins. The horse started forward with every step. The distance between Alara and her past widened. She watched the darkness behind her, half expecting her father to appear out of the night. But Rowan's presence beside her was steady, grounding. He kept his lantern lit, its glow cutting a safe path through the shadows. She didn't know what waited for her at the end of that road. She didn't know if she could heal. She didn't know if she deserved the kindness Rowan offered. But for the first time in her life, she was being taken towards something, not dragged away from something. And beside her was a man who had chosen, without hesitation, to save her. Her heart whispered a truth she didn't dare speak yet. Maybe this is the beginning. Rowan's farmhouse came into view just as dawn softened the sky into pale blue and gentle pink. The night had been long, and Alara had drifted in and out of exhausted half-sleep, jolting awake whenever the wagon hit a small bump. Each time, she'd look around in alarm, expecting to see her father's shadow, expecting Rowan to shout or grab her. He never did. Instead, he would simply murmur, "You're safe," and let her settle again. By the time they reached the Hawley property, Alara's body ached everywhere, but for the first time in her memory, the ache wasn't followed by fear. It was simply exhaustion, human exhaustion. The kind farmers felt after long days. The kind that healed instead of deepened. The farmhouse stood at the top of a small rise, sturdy and quiet against the breaking dawn. A wooden fence wrapped around the grazing pasture, and smoke curled from the chimney. Rowan must have left a fire, banked overnight. The world around the house felt calm in a way Alara had never known. The land seemed to breathe deeply. So did she. When the wagon stopped, Rowan didn't rush her. He came around to her side slowly, as if approaching a skittish animal. But not in a condescending way, just gentle, respectful. "Take your time," he said softly. Alara tried to step down but winced as pain shot through her ribs. Rowan steadied her without grabbing. His hands hovered close, ready only if she needed support. Once her feet touched the ground, her legs felt weak, so he offered his arm. She hesitated only a moment before lightly taking it. "Thank you." She whispered 2 small words, but they trembled with meaning. Rowan guided her inside. The house smelled faintly of pine, wood smoke, and something warm bread, maybe. In the soft morning light, the place felt alive with quiet memories. A knitted blanket on the sofa. Shelves of books Rowan had probably read many times. Hand-carved frames with gently fading photographs. Alara paused near the table, unsure where she was allowed to stand. Uncertain how to exist in a space without being yelled at. "You can sit," Rowan encouraged. Then added gently, "or walk around. Whatever you like." Whatever she liked. The words felt foreign. She perched on the edge of a chair like someone expecting to be scolded for it. Rowan noticed but didn't push. Instead, he went to the kitchen, lit the stove, and heated water. Alara watched him move. He wasn't loud. He wasn't tense. He didn't slam cupboards or mutter curses under his breath. Every motion was steady and quiet. For someone who had lived in chaos her entire life, the stillness felt almost unreal. Rowan returned with a warm cup of tea sweetened with honey. She stared at it, eyes wide. "This is for me?" "Of course." She held the cup with both hands, letting the heat seep into her fingers. Her throat tightened. No one had ever made something warm just for her. Not once. She sipped, and the sweetness made her eyes fill. She blinked quickly and looked down. "Are you hurting anywhere badly?" Rowan asked, his voice gentle but steady. She didn't want to burden him, so she responded automatically, "I'm fine." But Rowan had a way of seeing past words. "Alara," he said softly, "you don't have to hide anything here." Her breath caught. Slowly, shakily, she lifted the hem of her sleeve and revealed the bruises ringing her wrist. Then she pressed a hand to her ribs. "Here, it hurts to breathe deep." Rowan nodded, jaw tightening with quiet anger, not at her, but at what had been done to her. He fetched a jar of salve and handed it to her. "This helps with swelling. I can step outside if you'd like privacy to put it on." She blinked. He wasn't assuming he had the right to touch her. He wasn't acting like she owed him gratitude. He was simply kind. It took her a long moment to nod, overwhelmed by the unfamiliar respect. Rowan stepped outside, giving her time to breathe and gather herself. When he returned, she had pulled the shawl around her and looked a little steadier. "Eat something," he said, placing warm bread on the table. As she ate, Rowan explained gently, "You can stay here as long as you need. I won't make you go back. And no one will take you from this house without going through me first." Her hand stilled mid-bite. "Nobody's ever said that to me." "I'm sorry no one did," Rowan murmured. Tears spilled before she could stop them. She tried to wipe them quickly, apologizing under her breath. "You don't have to apologize for crying," Rowan said softly. "Not ever." That broke something open inside her, not in a painful way, but in a freeing one. She cried harder, quietly, shoulders shaking. Rowan didn't touch her, didn't crowd her. He simply sat near, offering presence without pressure. Eventually, her tears slowed. She lifted her gaze. "What will happen? My father?" "He'll come." "I expect he will," Rowan said calmly. "But he won't decide anything. You will." Her breath caught. No one had ever given her the authority to choose. What? What if he tries to take me by force? "Then he'll regret it," Rowan said, voice low and certain. "I don't hurt people unless they force my hand. But I will not let anyone harm you again." A shiver went through her, but not of fear. Something else filled her for the first time in her life. Safety. Not because Rowan threatened violence. but because he spoke with conviction, grounded and steady. Over the next hours, Rowan showed her the spare room, his late wife's sewing room. "Now quiet but warm. You're welcome to use it," he said softly, "but only if you're comfortable. If not, there's the sitting room or anywhere else that feels right." Alara stepped inside. The room wasn't large, but it was peaceful. A quilt folded over the bed, a window that looked out over the fields, a small shelf of thread spools faded by sunlight. She touched the quilt gently. "I've never had a room before," she whispered. Rowan's voice softened. "Then this one is yours." She turned toward him, her eyes shimmering but calmer now. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't owe me anything," Rowan said. "Just heal. That's enough." Alara stood there, fingers curled around the fabric, heart full of a feeling she didn't quite recognize but sensed was the beginning of something. Life-changing. Not love, not yet. But trust, safety. A place where bruises could fade and fear didn't rule every breath. New life, one she hadn't dared to imagine, and Rowan, the widowed farmer who had chosen to intervene, stepped back and allowed her the space to breathe, to rest, to rediscover who she was beneath all the hurt. As dawn brightened the sky fully, Alara looked out the window and whispered to the land, to God, to herself, "Maybe I survived for this."